Hi guys, Ramon Goose here. We're going to be doing part 3 of Eric Clapton's Guitars of the Greats series. In early 1969, Eric formed Blind Faith with Stevie Winwood, Ginger Baker and Rick Gretsch. Rehearsals for the group started in March 1969, and here in this photo from May 1969 you can see the group rehearsing at Eric Clapton's house and also at a village hall in Guildford. In these photos we can see Eric's 1964 Gibson ES335 TDC. Along with this guitar we can also see Clapton's Dan Electro 3021 short horn guitar. This guitar was probably painted by the same folk who painted his SG. After the rehearsals there's no longer any footage of Eric Clapton playing this guitar live. Around April and May 1969 the group attended Olympic Studios in London to start the recording sessions for the Blind Faith album. In this photo here we can see the Telecaster body with a Stratocaster neck guitar. This was the same guitar that was used in Cream in 1968 in Copenhagen, although at that time it was fitted with a late 60s Stratocaster neck with a rosewood fretboard and a large headstock. Around the Blind Faith era it was now fitted with a maple neck and sported a small 50s style headstock. I think this was the kind of time when Eric was really veering towards maple necks on his tellies and strats, and he actually preferred that because the custom would have originally come with a rosewood neck. I think that Eric would have liked the feel of this maple neck better than a rosewood one anyway, not least because the maple neck from the 50s would have had a nice V profile, which he then later employed on his own signature Fender models. As you can see there's a lot of wear on the fretboard, which would also indicate that it's quite an old neck. And this was of course the guitar that was used on June the 7th when Blind Faith had their debut concert in front of 100,000 people at Hyde Park. Seems to me that this guitar was only used in the sort of initial stages of Blind Faith. You can also see it in a photo from Helsinki in 1969 around mid-June. Eric also used a Firebird which he had obtained in the Cream era. He used this guitar a lot on the North American tours, as can be seen here in this photo from Madison Square Garden in July 69. He also used it on the Scandinavian tour as well. Earlier in the year, this Firebird guitar was also used in a special film actually. It was a music documentary film made in March 1969 by John Crome, and basically it was like a super session of several famous blues, jazz and rock artists sort of all coming together. It's well worth checking out the footage of Eric and Buddy Guy. You can really hear Eric's Firebird in all its glory. When Blind Faith played the Oslo concert, he actually used a custom Telecaster through some Marshall stacks and he broke a string halfway through the show. For the rest of the show he played out a backup guitar which was the Les Paul Darkburst. This was the guitar that he used of course on Cream's farewell tour. Sometime during the Blind Faith North American tour, Clapton gave this guitar to Paul Kossoff of Free. Free were actually supporting Blind Faith alongside Taste and Delaney and Bonnie. In exchange, Kossoff gave Eric a Les Paul Custom. Towards the end of Blind Faith's North American tour, both Clapton and Kossoff struck up a friendship. Clapton was actually particularly impressed with Kossoff's vibrato style. A mutual respect developed between the two guitarists, culminating in their exchanging instruments. Clapton received Kossoff's 3 pickup black Custom. Now you can see this in a few photos before Paul Kossoff actually gave it to Clapton, and notice in this photo that it has no scratch plate. In return, Clapton gave his 1958 Darkburst Les Paul Standard to Paul Kossoff. Before Clapton parted with his 58 Les Paul, you can see him playing here with Blind Faith at Gothenburg, Sweden on June the 18th, 1969. There has been some confusion on the internet about Paul Kossoff's 1955. It would appear that Paul either traded or sold his 55 Custom, as it appears to have ended up in the hands of Eric Clapton. Basically, Paul had traded this Custom or sold the Custom or swapped it for a Sunburst Les Paul, which he used in Black Cat Bone. So this is where it gets quite interesting and confusing at the same time. If we look at this photo here of Clapton playing at the Marquee Club in London with Cream on March 21st, 1967, it's quite possible that this was actually Paul Kossoff's original 1955 Les Paul Custom. So that's where the confusion really comes into play. That exchange that happened in 1969 was actually for the 3 pickup Les Paul Custom and not a 55 Les Paul Custom. So apparently this 1955 Custom guitar, which Clapton didn't really take to, was abandoned by him at the offices of Cream's agent Brian Epstein's NEMS organisation in April 1967. Then a gentleman by the name of Howard Parker acquired the guitar as part payment, and he kept the guitar under his bed until 1974, when it was then passed to a friend called John Wilson, another road manager, who stored it under his bed for the next 32 years. It then ended up being displayed at the 2006 Dallas International Guitar Festival with a price tag of $350,000. Whilst examining the guitar, Paul Kossoff's name was found on the plate that covers the control cavity. So as noted in part 2 of this series, I talked about a 1958 3-pickup Les Paul Custom that Eric Clapton picked up in America whilst recording for Atlantic Studios, and that was a Cream session from our April-May time in 1967. This actual guitar was slightly different because it retained the gold pickup covers and also the scratch plate. This guitar was actually given to Albert Lee during his tenure with Eric Clapton in the 1980s, and he still has it to this day. The 3-pickup custom that Kossoff exchanged with Clapton was used in John Lennon and the Plastic Ono Band. My guess is that the surprised look on Eric Clapton's face is down to Yoko Ono's vocal performance. Delaney and Bonnie, and also Derek and the Dominoes. One thing to note is that when Paul Kossoff owned that 3-pickup custom guitar, it still had the pickup covers on there. So when Clapton received this guitar, he must have removed those covers, which would make sense because he removed the covers from his original Beano Burst in the Blues Breakers. I think he felt it gave him a bit of a more aggressive tone. Let's go back and talk about Eric Clapton's ES335. As stated before, this guitar was used in the Blind Faith rehearsals around mid-1969, and it tended to be used as a backup guitar on tour, and it can be seen being played on Blind Faith's last concert on August 24th, 1969. The 335 wasn't actually seen again on stage until 1994, when Eric Clapton did the Nothing But Blues tour. Eventually, in 2004, the guitar was sold as part of the Crossroads guitar auction. Whilst performing with Delaney and Bonnie, Eric started to use his 1956 Fender Stratocaster, otherwise known as Brownie. Eric purchased this guitar at London's Sound City on May the 7th, 1967. At that particular time, he was actually using the full SG for Cream. Brownie wasn't seen on stage until the Hyde Park Blind Faith concert. At that concert, of course, he was only using the neck on his Telecaster body. However, with Delaney and Bonnie, he'd actually put the guitar back together, and it's likely that the guitar was actually put back together between mid and late 1969, as the Telecaster was last seen in July 1969 in Helsinki. So in this photo, it can be seen being used on February 1970 at the Fillmore West, San Francisco, and this was part of the Delaney and Bonnie US tour. Although Eric has stated that this was his actual main guitar, it's worth remembering that he also used his 3-pickup Paul Kossoff Les Paul Custom as well. The first studio sessions that Brownie was used on were for the 1970 album titled simply Eric Clapton. The guitar can also be seen on the cover of that album. According to Eric Clapton himself, he used Brownie on all of the Layla and Other Assorted Love songs from Derek and the Dominoes, and that included the title track Layla. Following the release of the Derek and the Dominoes album, Eric went on a US tour which lasted from October to December 1970. And this also included the appearance on ABC's The Johnny Cash Show in mid-November. So Brownie can be seen all around this time. It was next spotted on the charity concert for Bangladesh in August 1971, which was organised by George Harrison and Indian sitar master Ravi Shankar. On a 1975 US tour, it was also used alongside Blackie. In 1985, both Brownie and Blackie were retired from stage use. Eric eventually sold Brownie on June the 24th, 1999. It fetched $497,500. It actually broke the record for the most expensive guitar ever sold at that time, and it was sold for nearly $500,000. Okay, next up is probably Eric Clapton's most famous guitar. The name of this guitar is Blackie. So Eric assembled this guitar in 1970 using parts from 4 different 1950s Stratocasters that he bought from George Gruen. Additional parts were also purchased at the Showbud Guitar Shop in Nashville. Eric has stated that he carried these 4 guitars back to England before he assembled them into what is now known as Blackie. To quote Eric, "The guitar I chose to use for my return to recording was one I built myself, a black Fender Stratocaster I had nicknamed Blackie. I went into Showbud in Nashville, and they had a stack of Strats in the back of the shop. When I got home, I gave one to Steve, one to Pete Townsend, and another to George Harrison, and I kept the rest. I then took the other 3 and made one guitar out of them, using the best components of each. According to Clapton's tech at the time, Lee Dixon, the guitar was actually assembled using a 1956 body and a 1957 neck, and the pickups were taken from a third guitar. Suffice to say, all the parts originated from Stratocasters made between 1956 and 1957, and that also includes the pickups. When Clapton returned after his 2-year hiatus in the early 70s, Blackie became his main go-to guitar. It also became his main guitar in the recording studio. It was the most prominent guitar on one of my favourite albums, the 1974 461 Ocean Boulevard. It was used on all the other albums up to 1985, which includes albums No Reason to Cry, Slow Hand, Backless, Another Ticket, Money and Cigarettes, and Behind the Sun. It was also featured on 3 live albums, E.C. Was Here, Just One Night, and Timepieces Volume 2 Live in the 70s. Eric used Blackie until 1984, and by 1986 Blackie was gone out of rotation completely. The next guitar we're going to talk about is a rather odd-shaped 1958 Gibson Carina Explorer. Eric purchased this guitar at Alex Music Instruments in New York around the mid-70s. It can be seen on photos taken during the 1974 and 1975 tour. And one unique feature about this guitar is the fact that it's actually got a shortened bass bout. I've actually talked a bit about this guitar on my other video called History of Explorers, so do check that out if you have time. Clapton actually believed this was a prototype guitar, and that was a reason for this strange shape. The previous owner had actually just literally sawed off that lower bout. He was not happy and wanted to take the guitar back to the store and get a refund. He used this guitar on several songs from the album E.C. Was Here, which was released in 1975. Okay, Eric Clapton's 1950s Gibson Birdland. Eric was seen with this guitar on the charity concert for Bangladesh in August 1971. This guitar wasn't really seen anywhere else after that concert, but I would recommend to watch the YouTube video While My Guitar Gently Weeps with Harrison and Clapton trading licks, and it's a really cool sounding guitar actually. I really like it. It suits Eric's style really well. It's worth noting that Eric has actually used other Birdlands on other projects and albums. For example, when he was playing in the Chuck Berry movie. And also I recall seeing a live concert of his where he finished on Somewhere Over the Rainbow and he was playing a Birdland. But I don't think it was the one that we see here in this concert for Bangladesh. So here's a question for you guys. I've always loved this photo of Eric's guitars. This photo was taken backstage in 1985 at a concert in Tokyo. I wonder guys if you can tell me something about this Gibson Les Paul here. So do you think it's like a reissue one that was made in the, say, early 80s? Or do you think it was actually a vintage burst like a 1960 Les Paul? It'd be great to hear your views on this. Another guitar that can be seen in that backstage photo from Tokyo is Eric's 1954 Fender Stratocaster. And it was his main slide guitar around 1979 to 1983. Primarily it was used on the song Tulsa Time. And it can be seen in the Arms charity concert filmed on September the 20th, 1983 at the Royal Albert Hall in London. Okay, we're going to finish with the famous George Harrison guitar called Lucy. Clapton borrowed this guitar from George around 1973 and used it for his comeback Rainbow concert on January the 13th. And of course, this was the same guitar that Clapton had played earlier on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Okay guys, so this video really takes us up to the 1980s. Please let me know if you would like a part 4 where we delve into the more modern Stratocasters. Thanks for watching. There's some really cool videos coming up. Please subscribe and see you soon.